In the year 2347, humanity had spread far beyond Earth. People lived on dozens of planets and moons, connected by advanced ships that traveled between stars. They worked alongside aliens, traded goods, shared knowledge, and built a vast network of colonies. But there was one strange thing no one talked about much: an invisible line on every galactic map. This line marked the edge of human space. Beyond it, there was nothing but mystery. No one dared to cross it, or even ask why it existed. At a small research outpost near this boundary, an astrophysicist named Daniel Carter was working late. He sat in front of a glowing screen filled with numbers and charts. The outpost wasn't busy. Most scientists preferred stations closer to the center of human activity. But Daniel liked the quiet. It gave him time to think. That night, something unusual caught his eye. While studying data from nearby stars, he noticed a pattern that didn't make sense. Certain signals seemed distorted, almost as if they were being blocked. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He had seen anomalies before, but this felt different. To confirm his suspicions, he ran the data again, adjusting the parameters. The results were the same. Something was interfering with the readings, and it wasn't natural. Curious, he decided to dig deeper. As he sifted through old records, he found references to similar patterns discovered decades earlier. Each time, the findings had been dismissed without explanation. His colleague, Laura Bennett, walked into the room just as Daniel was pulling up another file. She carried 2 cups of coffee and set one down beside him. "Still at it?" she asked, glancing at the cluttered desk. Her tone was light, but her expression showed concern. Laura was practical and cautious, qualities that balanced Daniel's bold curiosity. "I think I found something," Daniel said, pointing at the screen. "See these fluctuations? They're not random. Someone, or something, is tampering with our instruments." Laura frowned as she studied the graph. "You mean out there?" She gestured toward the window, where the endless void of space stretched beyond. "That's impossible. We've mapped this region for years. If there was interference, we'd know about it." "Exactly," Daniel replied. "That's what makes it so strange. Why would anyone hide it?" Laura hesitated. She knew Daniel well enough to recognize the spark of obsession in his eyes. Once he latched onto an idea, he wouldn't let go until he had answers. And while she admired his determination, she also worried about where it might lead them. Crossing boundaries, literal or figurative, was dangerous. Still, she couldn't deny her own curiosity. "What do you want to do?" she finally asked. "For now, keep looking," Daniel said. "There has to be more. Maybe someone else noticed this too." Over the next few hours, they combed through archives, searching for clues. Most files contained routine reports, but one caught their attention. It was a fragment of an ancient message buried deep within the system. The text was written in a language long abandoned by modern humans. With some effort, they managed to translate part of it. Asterisk, "Do not look beyond the veil. What lies ahead is not meant for you." Asterisk. Laura shivered despite herself. "This sounds like a warning," she murmured. "Maybe we should stop." But Daniel shook his head. "Warnings are just words. I need to know what's really out there." As the hours passed, the weight of their discovery settled over them. Neither spoke much, each lost in thought. Outside, the stars twinkled faintly, indifferent to the questions swirling inside the outpost. For Daniel, the line on the map was no longer just a boundary. It was a challenge. And for Laura, it was a reminder of how little they truly understood about the universe. By morning, both were exhausted but resolved. Whatever secrets lay beyond the edge of human space, they were determined to uncover them, even if it meant risking everything. The next day, Daniel and Laura couldn't shake the feeling that they were onto something big. The warning from the ancient message lingered in their minds, but it only deepened Daniel's resolve to investigate further. He spent hours poring over old maps, trying to find any inconsistencies or hidden details. Laura stayed by his side, though her unease grew with each passing moment. "Are you sure about this?" Laura asked as she watched Daniel mark coordinates on a star chart. "What if it's not just a warning? What if it's a threat?" Daniel paused, his pen hovering over the map. "It's not a threat unless we make it one," he replied. "Think about it, Laura. We've always accepted that the boundary exists without questioning why. Isn't that strange? Why would anyone stop exploring? There has to be a reason." Laura sighed. She wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. Maybe there's a good reason no one talks about it. Maybe some things are better left alone. Before Daniel could respond, the outpost's communication system buzzed. A transmission was coming through. They exchanged puzzled glances. Visitors were rare this far out. When Daniel activated the screen, a man appeared. His face was weathered, and his dark eyes carried a hint of urgency. "Hello," the man said. "My name is Samuel Hayes. I'm a historian specializing in interstellar cartography. I heard rumors about your outpost studying anomalies near the boundary. Am I correct?" Daniel hesitated before nodding. "Who told you about us?" Samuel smiled faintly. "Let's just say I have my sources. May I come aboard? I think I can help." Laura leaned closer to Daniel and whispered, "Do we trust him?" Daniel shrugged. "We don't have much choice. If he knows something, we need to hear it." A few hours later, Samuel arrived at the outpost. He carried a small bag filled with notes and devices. As he settled into the cramped meeting room, he wasted no time getting to the point. "I've been researching the boundary for years," he explained. "Legends say it's been there since humanity first started mapping the stars. No one knows who put it there, or why." Daniel leaned forward, intrigued. "Have you found anything concrete?" Samuel nodded slowly. "There are stories. Tales of ships disappearing after crossing the line. Some claim to have seen ruins of civilizations that try to go beyond. Others talk about shadows." "Shadows," Laura echoed, her voice tinged with skepticism. "Yes," Samuel said. "They're described as beings that exist outside our understanding, entities that guard whatever lies beyond the boundary." Laura glanced at Daniel, who looked more excited than worried. "That's wild," she muttered. "Sounds like superstition." "Maybe," Samuel admitted, "but superstitions often start with truth. Have you noticed anything unusual lately?" Daniel hesitated, then decided to share what they'd uncovered. The distorted signals, the ancient message, the eerie sense that something was deliberately hiding the truth. Samuel listened intently, his expression growing graver with each word. When Daniel finished, Samuel leaned back in his chair. "You're treading dangerous ground," he said. "If you keep pushing, you might uncover something you can't handle." "But isn't that worth the risk?" Daniel countered. "We can't live in ignorance forever." Laura frowned. "At what cost, though? What if crossing the boundary puts everyone in danger?" Samuel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out a worn notebook and flipped through its pages. "There's one more thing," he said quietly. "Centuries ago, an expedition ventured past the boundary. They never returned. All records of their mission were erased, or so they thought." He slid the notebook across the table. Inside were sketches of strange symbols and fragments of logs written by members of the lost crew. One entry stood out. Asterisk, "The void calls to us. It knows we're here." Asterisk. A chill ran down Laura's spine. Even Daniel seemed unsettled, though his curiosity burned brighter than ever. "This changes nothing," he said firmly. "If anything, it proves we're right to investigate." Samuel studied him for a long moment. "Just remember, you won't be the first to try, and you may not be the last to fail." As the conversation ended, Laura couldn't shake the image of those haunting words. The void calling, shadows watching. Whatever lay beyond the boundary, it wasn't going to let them cross easily. But Daniel's determination was unshakable. For better or worse, their journey had already begun. Daniel spent the next few days going over Samuel's notes, piecing together fragments of information about the lost expedition. Laura helped reluctantly, her unease growing with each new detail they uncovered. The more they learned, the clearer it became that crossing the boundary wasn't just risky, it could be deadly. Yet Daniel refused to back down. He believed the answers were worth any danger. One evening, as the three of them sat in the outpost's dimly lit common room, Samuel broke the silence. "If you're serious about this," he said, "you'll need a ship, something small and fast, capable of slipping past whatever's out there." Laura looked up sharply. "Wait, are you saying we should actually go? Cross the boundary?" "It's not my decision," Samuel replied. "But if you're determined, I can point you toward an old scout ship docked nearby. It's outdated, but it still works. Of course, modifying it for a trip like this won't be easy." Daniel nodded eagerly. "We'll make it work. We don't have a choice." Laura groaned, rubbing her temples. "This is insane. Do you even realize what you're suggesting? If anyone finds out, we'll lose our jobs, or worse." "No one will find out," Daniel said firmly. "Not until we come back with proof." Samuel watched the exchange quietly, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "If you do this, you need to prepare for the worst. Whatever stopped those ships centuries ago might still be out there. And trust me, it won't welcome you." Despite her fears, Laura couldn't bring herself to walk away. She knew Daniel well enough to know that nothing would stop him now, and she couldn't let him face the unknown alone. So together, the three of them began working on the scout ship. They scavenged parts from the outpost's storage, rewiring systems, and reinforcing the hull. It was exhausting work, but it gave them a sense of purpose. As they labored, Laura found herself thinking about the warnings. Shadows, ruins, lost expeditions. What had really happened to those who crossed the line? Was it aliens? Some kind of cosmic force? Or something else entirely? The questions haunted her dreams, leaving her restless and anxious. One night, while Daniel tinkered with the ship's navigation system, Laura approached him. "Do you ever wonder if we're making a mistake?" she asked softly. Daniel paused, his hands resting on the console. "All the time," he admitted. "But think about it, Laura. Humanity has always pushed boundaries. That's how we grow. If we let fear control us, we'll never move forward." Laura sighed. "I just hope you're right." The day before their planned departure, Samuel pulled Laura aside. "Listen," he said, his voice low. "If things go wrong out there, promise me you'll get yourself to safety. Don't let your loyalty blind you." She frowned. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying Daniel's driven by curiosity, but sometimes curiosity gets people killed. You need to look out for yourself." His words lingered in her mind as she returned to the ship. Daniel was running final checks, humming to himself. Watching him, Laura felt torn between admiration and dread. He truly believed they were doing the right thing. But what if he was wrong? The next morning, they gathered aboard the ship. It was cramped and smelled faintly of oil, but it was ready. As they powered up the engines, Laura glanced at Daniel and Samuel, both focused and tense. For a moment, she wondered if they'd made a terrible decision. But then the ship lifted off, leaving the outpost behind. Through the viewport, they watched the stars blur as they approached the boundary. The line on the map loomed ahead, invisible yet unmistakable. No alarms sounded, no barriers appeared, just empty space. And yet, as they crossed into the unknown, a strange feeling settled over them. A sense that they were being watched. The moment they crossed the boundary, everything seemed normal at first. The stars outside the ship's windows twinkled brightly, and the hum of the engines filled the cabin. But it didn't take long for things to feel off. The instruments on the control panel began flickering unpredictably. Numbers jumped around, and readings showed impossible data. Laura stared at the screens, her heart pounding. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. Daniel frowned, tapping at the controls. "I don't know. It's like something's interfering with our systems. Samuel leaned forward in his seat, gripping the armrests. This is what I was afraid of, he muttered. Whatever's out here doesn't want us to understand it. Laura shot him a nervous glance. You mean the shadows? He didn't answer, but his silence said enough. She turned back to Daniel, who was trying to stabilize the ship. His hands moved quickly over the console, but nothing seemed to work. The lights dimmed slightly, casting eerie shadows across the cramped cabin. Maybe we should turn back, Laura suggested, her voice trembling. We've already crossed the line. Isn't that enough? No, Daniel replied firmly. If we go back now, we'll never learn anything. We have to keep going. As they pressed forward, strange phenomena began to occur. Time itself felt distorted. Minutes passed in what seemed like seconds, and then stretched into hours without warning. Laura glanced at the clock on the wall, confused. Is that thing broken? She asked. I don't think so, Samuel said quietly. It's not just the clock. It's everything. Even their conversations started to feel disjointed, as though words were slipping away before they could fully form. Laura found herself struggling to focus, her thoughts clouded by an unshakable sense of unease. She clutched the edge of her seat, trying to steady herself. Then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, barely audible over the hum of the engines. But soon, the voices grew louder, overlapping in a chaotic jumble. They spoke in languages none of them recognized, their tones shifting between soothing and menacing. Laura covered her ears, but the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside her head. Do you hear that? She whispered, her voice shaking. Daniel nodded grimly. Yeah, I hear it too. Samuel closed his eyes, his face pale. They're testing us, he said, seeing how much we can take. Who? Laura demanded. What are you talking about? The shadows, Samuel replied. They're watching, waiting. Laura wanted to argue, to tell him he was being paranoid, but deep down, she knew he was right. Something, or someone, was out there, probing their minds. She could feel it, cold and relentless, pressing against her thoughts. Despite the chaos, Daniel refused to give up. He adjusted the ship's course, steering them toward a nearby planet visible on the scanners. We need to land, he said. Get our bearings. Figure out what's causing this. Samuel shook his head. That's a bad idea. You don't know what's down there. We can't stay here either, Daniel snapped. If we do, we'll lose our minds, or worse. Reluctantly, Samuel agreed. Laura stayed silent, torn between fear and exhaustion. As the ship descended through the planet's atmosphere, the whispers faded, replaced by an unsettling quiet. The surface below was barren, dotted with jagged rocks and endless stretches of gray sand. In the distance, towering structures rose from the ground, ruins of some ancient civilization. When the ship touched down, none of them moved for a moment. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, charged with anticipation. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. Let's suit up, he said. We're here now. We might as well see what we're dealing with. As they prepared to leave the safety of the ship, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Whatever had driven others away, or worse, was still out there, waiting. The three of them stepped out of the ship, their boots crunching against the gray, dusty surface of the planet. The air was thin and cold, forcing them to rely on their suits' life support systems. Around them stretched a desolate landscape, endless plains of barren ground broken only by jagged rocks and the towering ruins in the distance. The silence was oppressive, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Daniel led the way, his helmet light cutting through the dimness. Laura followed closely behind, her eyes darting nervously from one shadow to another. Samuel brought up the rear, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he expected danger at any moment. None of them spoke. The weight of where they were, and what might be watching, kept them silent. As they approached the ruins, the structures grew larger and more detailed. They were made of a dark, metallic material that seemed to absorb the light. Strange symbols covered the walls, etched deep into the surface. Daniel stopped to examine one of the markings, running his gloved hand over it. "This looks like writing," he said, his voice crackling through the comm system in their helmets. "Writing?" Laura asked, peering over his shoulder. "From who? Or what?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But it's old. Really old." Samuel joined them, studying the symbols with a grim expression. "These aren't human," he said, "and they're not from any alien culture I've seen before." Laura shivered, despite the warmth inside her suit. "So, what does that mean?" "That something else built this place." "It means we're not alone here," Samuel replied. "Not anymore, anyway." They pressed on, moving deeper into the ruins. The buildings loomed above them, casting long, distorted shadows in the faint light of the distant sun. Inside one of the larger structures, they found murals covering the walls. The images depicted humanoid figures standing beneath strange, swirling shapes in the sky. At first glance, the scene seemed peaceful, almost reverent. But as they looked closer, they noticed something chilling. In each mural, the figures were being consumed by shadowy forms. Dark, amorphous entities that seemed to stretch endlessly. "What are those things?" Laura whispered, her voice trembling. "I think those are the shadows," Samuel said, his tone heavy. "The ones from the legends." Daniel stared at the murals, his mind racing. If these people tried to reach beyond the boundary, maybe they paid the price for it. Laura shook her head, struggling to process what she was seeing. "You're saying these shadows, they destroyed them, just because they crossed some invisible line." "It's not about the line," Samuel said. "It's about what lies beyond it. Whatever's out there doesn't want visitors." Despite the growing fear gnawing at her, Laura couldn't help but notice something odd about the murals. In every image, the shadowy beings weren't attacking outright. They were pulling the figures toward them, almost as if inviting them. She pointed it out to the others. "Look, it's like they're not just destroying. They're calling." Daniel frowned. "Calling? To what?" "I don't know," Laura admitted, "but it doesn't feel random. Like they're looking for something, or someone." Before they could discuss it further, a low hum filled the air. It wasn't coming from their suits or the ship. It was everywhere, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. The sound grew louder, resonating in their chests. Laura instinctively took a step back. "What is that?" "I don't like this," Samuel muttered, glancing around nervously. "We need to leave. Now." But Daniel hesitated, drawn to the center of the room. There, resting on a pedestal, was a glowing artifact. It pulsed with an otherworldly light, casting strange patterns across the walls. The hum seemed to be coming from it. Without thinking, Daniel reached out to touch it. "Don't," Laura shouted, grabbing his arm. "You don't know what it'll do." "We can't just ignore it," Daniel argued. "This could be the key to understanding everything." Samuel stepped forward, his face pale. "Or it could kill us all. Trust me, Daniel. Some things are better left untouched." For a moment, Daniel wavered. But curiosity won out. He gently placed his hand on the artifact. Instantly, the light flared brighter, and the hum turned into a deafening roar. Images flooded their minds, stars collapsing, civilizations crumbling, and endless voids stretching into infinity. Laura stumbled back, clutching her head. "Get it off," she screamed. Daniel yanked his hand away, breathing hard. The artifact dimmed, but the damage was done. Outside, the wind picked up, howling like a living thing. Shadows began to move across the walls, shifting unnaturally. "We woke something up," Samuel said, his voice barely audible over the noise. "We need to go. Now." They ran back toward the ship, the shadows chasing them, whispering promises they couldn't fully understand. Back aboard the ship, the three of them scrambled to secure the artifact. Daniel carefully placed it inside a containment unit, its glow dimming but still faintly visible through the reinforced glass. The hum had faded, but the tension in the cabin remained thick enough to cut with a knife. Laura leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing, while Samuel paced back and forth, his face pale with worry. "What did we just do?" Laura asked, her voice trembling. "That thing. It wasn't meant to be touched." Daniel ignored her question, focusing instead on the artifact. "It's not dangerous now," he said, though his tone lacked certainty. "We can study it. Maybe it'll tell us why the boundary exists. Or maybe it'll kill us," Samuel snapped, stopping mid-pace. "You saw what happened out there. Those shadows, they reacted to you touching it." Laura nodded, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "He's right, Daniel. We don't know what that thing is, or what it wants. For all we know, it's calling those entities to us." Daniel hesitated, glancing at the artifact. He wanted to believe they'd made the right choice by bringing it aboard, but doubt crept into his mind. Still, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. "If we destroy it," he said finally, "we might lose our only chance to understand what's out here. Don't you see? This could explain everything. The boundary, the warnings, the lost expeditions." Samuel shook his head, frustration etched on his face. "Understanding won't matter if we're dead. You're playing with forces way beyond us." Before the argument could escalate further, the ship's systems began acting up again. Lights flickered, and the temperature dropped sharply. A low, rhythmic pulse echoed through the cabin, syncing with the faint glow of the artifact. Laura's eyes widened as she realized the sound matched the whispers they'd heard earlier. "It's doing something," she whispered, backing away from the containment unit. "We need to get rid of it." "No," Daniel barked, stepping between her and the artifact. "We've come this far. We can't give up now." Samuel grabbed Daniel's arm, his grip firm. "Listen to yourself. You're letting your curiosity blind you. That thing isn't just an object. It's alive. And whatever it wants, it's not good." The lights went out completely, plunging the cabin into darkness. For a moment, the only illumination came from the artifact, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Then the whispers returned, louder this time, overlapping and chaotic. They filled the air, pressing against their minds like cold fingers. Laura clutched her helmet, her breath quickening. "Turn it off. Shut it down." "I can't," Daniel admitted, his voice strained. "I don't even know how." Samuel cursed under his breath and moved toward the controls. "Then we jettison it. Right now." Before anyone could act, the artifact flared brightly, forcing them to shield their eyes. When the light faded, holographic images appeared, projected onto the walls of the cabin. The images showed galaxies spinning, stars dying, and civilizations collapsing. Each scene ended the same way, humanoid figures being consumed by shadowy forms. Laura stared at the projections, her stomach churning. "This is what happens when people cross the boundary," she murmured. "They don't just disappear, they're erased." Daniel watched the images intently, his expression unreadable. But why? Why would those shadows stop anyone from exploring? "Maybe they're protecting something," Samuel suggested, his voice hollow. "Something so powerful or dangerous that no one is allowed near it." As the holograms continued, words began to form among the images. The text was written in the same ancient language they'd seen in the ruins, but this time it translated itself into English. One phrase repeated over and over: "Asterisk, you were warned." Asterisk. The message sent a chill through all of them. Laura turned to Daniel, her eyes pleading. "Please, we have to get rid of it." Daniel hesitated, torn between fear and fascination. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, let's dump it." But as they prepared to eject the artifact, the ship shuddered violently, alarms blared, and the temperature plummeted further. The shadows from the projections seemed to spill into the cabin, writhing and twisting like living things. Laura screamed, backing into a corner. Samuel shouted for Daniel to hurry, but the controls weren't responding. "We're too late," Samuel muttered, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "It's already here." The artifact pulsed one final time, bathing the cabin in blinding light. When the glow faded, the shadows were gone. But so was any sense of safety. Whatever had been awakened, it was now watching them, waiting. The cabin fell silent after the artifact's final pulse, but the weight of what had just happened pressed down on all of them. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the containment unit where the artifact had been moments before. Its glow was gone, leaving only an empty shell behind. Laura slumped against the wall, her breathing ragged, while Samuel leaned heavily on the control panel, his face pale and drawn. What just happened?" Laura whispered, breaking the silence. Her voice trembled, barely audible over the faint hum of the ship's systems slowly coming back online. Daniel shook his head, still trying to process it himself. "I don't know," he admitted. "But whatever that thing was, it's not here anymore." Samuel straightened, his expression grim. "It didn't leave," he said. "It spread." Laura frowned, confused. "What do you mean, it spread?" "I mean it's inside the ship now," Samuel replied, his tone heavy with dread. "Those shadows, they're not just outside. They're in here with us." As if to confirm his words, the temperature dropped again, sending a chill through the cabin. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as though something unseen was pressing against them. Laura hugged herself tightly, glancing around nervously. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice cracking. "We keep moving," Daniel said firmly. "We can't stay here. If this place is compromised, we need to get back to human space." Samuel nodded reluctantly. "Agreed. But we need to be careful. Whatever those shadows are, they'll try to stop us." Daniel took a deep breath and moved toward the controls, his hand steady despite the fear gnawing at him. He powered up the engines, checking the navigation system. To his relief, the boundary wasn't far, just a few hours' journey away. But as he plotted the course, the ship's instruments began acting unpredictably again. Readings fluctuated wildly, and the console emitted low, erratic beats. "This isn't good," Laura muttered, watching the chaos unfold. "The shadows, they're messing with the ship. They're testing us," Samuel said quietly, his eyes darting around the cabin. "Seeing how much we can take before we break." Laura shivered, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. "Break? What does that even mean?" "It means they feed on fear," Samuel explained. "They push you until you can't think straight, until you give in." Daniel clenched his jaw, refusing to let panic take hold. "Then we don't give them anything to work with. We stay focused. We get out of here." Easier said than done. As the ship moved forward, the whispers returned, softer this time, but no less unsettling. They echoed in their minds, twisting thoughts into doubts and fears. Laura found herself questioning every decision they'd made, replaying moments from the trip in her head. Why had she agreed to come? What had possessed her to trust Daniel's reckless curiosity? Samuel seemed to sense her unease. "Don't listen to them," he said sharply. "They're trying to divide us. Stay strong." Laura nodded, though tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to believe Samuel, but the voices were relentless, digging deeper into her mind with each passing second. Even Daniel wasn't immune. Images flashed in his thoughts, memories of past failures, regrets he'd buried long ago. For a moment, he considered abandoning the mission altogether, turning the ship around and letting the shadows guide them wherever they wanted. But then he remembered why they'd come, to uncover the truth, to understand what lay beyond the boundary. That thought alone kept him grounded. Hours passed, though time felt distorted, stretching impossibly long. The closer they got to the boundary, the more the shadows resisted. Lights flickered violently, and the ship rocked as if caught in an invisible storm. Laura gripped her seat, white-knuckled, while Samuel muttered under his breath, clutching a small pendant around his neck. Finally, the boundary came into view, a faint line dividing the stars ahead. Freedom was within reach, but as they approached, the shadows surged, flooding the cabin with darkness. Shapes moved at the edges of their vision, indistinct but menacing. "We're not going to make it," Laura whispered, her voice hollow. "Yes, we are," Daniel said, gripping the controls tightly. "Hold on." With one final burst of speed, the ship crossed the line. Instantly, the darkness vanished, replaced by the familiar glow of human-controlled space. The whispers faded, leaving only silence. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Laura broke down, sobbing with relief. Samuel sank into his seat, exhausted but alive. Daniel stared out the viewport, his hands trembling slightly. They had escaped, but at what cost? And what had they left behind? The relief of crossing back into human space was short-lived. As the ship drifted safely beyond the boundary, the three of them sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The shadows were gone, or at least, they seemed to be, but the weight of what they'd experienced lingered like a dark cloud over the cabin. Laura finally broke the quiet. "We made it," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But did we really escape?" Daniel glanced at her, his face pale but determined. "We're alive. That's what matters." Samuel shook his head, his expression grim. "Alive doesn't mean safe. Those shadows, they weren't just trying to stop us. They wanted something. Maybe they still do." Laura shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "What could they want? We didn't take anything with us." "Maybe not physically," Samuel replied. "But think about it. That artifact, it wasn't just an object. It was connected to those shadows somehow. And now that connection is inside us." Daniel frowned. "Inside us? What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the whispers," Samuel said, his tone heavy. "They're still there, aren't they? In your head. You can feel them, can't you?" Laura stiffened, her eyes widening. She hadn't wanted to admit it, but Samuel was right. The whispers hadn't completely disappeared. They were fainter now, almost like echoes. But they were still there, nagging at the edges of her mind. Daniel hesitated before nodding slowly. Even he couldn't deny the lingering unease in his thoughts. "What does it mean?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are they watching us? Following us?" "I don't know," Samuel admitted. "But if I were you, I wouldn't trust myself. Not completely." The words sent a chill through all of them. If the shadows had left some part of themselves behind, how could they ever be sure of their own actions? How could they know whether their decisions were truly their own, or influenced by something else? As the hours passed, the tension aboard the ship grew unbearable. None of them slept. None of them dared to close their eyes. Every sound, every flicker of light, made them jump. Laura found herself staring out the viewport, half expecting to see the shadows reappear. Daniel kept checking the navigation system, as though afraid the ship might turn itself around without his control. Samuel stayed silent for long stretches, muttering under his breath whenever the whispers grew louder. Finally, Daniel spoke up. "We need to tell someone. When we get back, we have to report this. Warn them about what's out there." Samuel laughed bitterly. "And who's going to believe us? A historian, a scientist, and an engineer walk into a bar and say they saw shadowy entities guarding the edge of space. People will think we're crazy." "He's right," Laura added quietly. "Even if we show them the data, even if we try to explain, it'll sound insane. No one will listen." "But we can't just pretend it didn't happen," Daniel insisted. "If we don't say anything, someone else will go out there. Someone less prepared. They'll end up like the others, lost forever." Samuel sighed, rubbing his temples. "Then we tread carefully. Share only what we must. But remember this. Whatever's out there, it doesn't want to be known. And it won't forget about us." The thought hung heavily in the air. Laura looked down at her hands, realizing how much they were shaking. Do you think we'll ever be free of it? Samuel didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and weary. I don't know. But I do know one thing. The boundary exists for a reason. And maybe ignorance really is bliss. As the ship continued its journey home, the whispers remained, a constant reminder of the price they'd paid for their curiosity. Whatever freedom they'd gained felt fragile, fleeting. The shadows were gone, but their presence lingered, buried deep within the minds of those who had crossed the line. When the ship finally docked at a human outpost near the boundary, Daniel, Laura, and Samuel were greeted with curious stares. Word of their unauthorized trip had spread quickly, and officials were already waiting for them. The questions began almost immediately. Why had they crossed the line? What had they seen? Did they bring anything back? Daniel tried to stay calm as he answered, careful not to reveal too much. He spoke vaguely about anomalies and scientific curiosity, avoiding any mention of the shadows or the artifact. Laura stayed silent, her face pale and distant, while Samuel chimed in occasionally, steering the conversation away from dangerous territory. But the officials weren't satisfied. This isn't just about breaking protocol, one of the officers said sternly. You trespassed into restricted space, a region no one has explored in centuries. Do you have any idea how serious this is? We didn't mean to cause trouble, Daniel replied, his tone measured. We were looking for answers that could help humanity understand its place in the galaxy. The officer shook his head. Some things are better left unknown. You've put everyone at risk, including yourselves. Laura flinched at the words, her guilt bubbling to the surface. She wanted to argue, to explain what they'd encountered, but she knew it would only make things worse. Instead, she focused on keeping her breathing steady, trying to block out the whispers still echoing in her mind. After hours of questioning, they were finally released, with strict orders to remain within the outpost until further notice. As they walked back to their quarters, Samuel pulled Daniel aside. We need to destroy the data, he said quietly. All of it, before someone else finds out what we really saw. Daniel hesitated, torn between his instincts and his conscience. If we do that, everything we went through will be for nothing. And if we don't, those shadows will come for us again, Samuel countered. Do you want to risk that? Risk putting everyone else in danger? Laura overheard the exchange and stepped closer. He's right, Daniel. We can't keep this secret forever. Sooner or later, someone will figure it out. And then what? Daniel clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. He had always believed knowledge was worth any price, but now he wasn't so sure. The cost of their discovery weighed heavily on all of them, and he couldn't ignore the fear in Laura's eyes, or the weariness in Samuel's voice. Reluctantly, he nodded. Fine, we'll erase everything, but I'm keeping my notes, just in case. Samuel frowned but didn't argue. They spent the next several hours deleting files, wiping logs, and dismantling equipment. By the time they finished, there was no trace of their journey left, except for the memories etched deep into their minds. As days turned into weeks, life at the outpost settled into a fragile routine. The whispers grew quieter, but never fully disappeared. Laura found herself avoiding mirrors, afraid of what she might see in her reflection. Samuel spent most of his time alone, poring over old texts about myths and legends, and Daniel threw himself into mundane tasks, desperate to distract himself from the gnawing sense of unease. One evening, as Laura sat staring out a window at the stars, Daniel joined her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Laura broke the silence. Do you think we made the right choice? She asked softly. Daniel sighed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I don't know anymore. All I know is that some questions, maybe they're not meant to be answered. Laura nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in her expression. And the shadows. They're still out there, Daniel admitted, watching, waiting. As they sat together in silence, The vastness of space stretched endlessly before them, a reminder of how small they truly were. Whatever secrets lay beyond the boundary, they remained hidden, guarded by forces humanity could never hope to comprehend. And though they had escaped with their lives, the shadow's presence lingered, a constant reminder that some mysteries were best left undisturbed. Months passed, and life moved forward, or at least it seemed to. Laura returned to Earth, leaving the outpost behind. She tried to rebuild her routine, taking up work as a consultant for space exploration projects. On the surface, she appeared normal, but inside, she was haunted. The whispers had grown fainter over time, but they never fully disappeared. Some nights, she would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced she could feel the shadows watching her from the corners of her room. She poured herself into writing a detailed report about their journey, hoping it might serve as a warning to others. But when she submitted it to the authorities, they dismissed her account as fiction. "There's no proof," one official said bluntly, "and even if there were, people wouldn't believe you." Frustrated but unsurprised, Laura decided to publish her findings independently. She wrote under a pseudonym, sharing fragments of what they'd uncovered: the boundary, the artifact, the shadows. To her dismay, the story gained little attention. Those who read it either laughed it off as science fiction or accused her of fabricating the tale for fame. In the end, her words fell on deaf ears, just as Samuel had predicted. Daniel stayed at the outpost longer than he intended, unable to return to Earth. He buried himself in his work, analyzing data from safer regions of space. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. His notes, the ones he'd kept despite Samuel's warnings, remained locked away in a secure compartment. He told himself he was holding onto them for research. But deep down, he knew the truth. He couldn't let go of what they'd discovered, even if it meant living with the weight of it forever. Samuel disappeared entirely. After leaving the outpost, he vanished without a trace, leaving only a cryptic message behind. Some truths are too dangerous to share. Whether he had gone into hiding or met some other fate, no one knew. Laura often thought about him, and about Daniel. She wondered if they felt the same emptiness she did, the sense that their lives had been irrevocably changed by something they barely understood. Sometimes she considered reaching out to Daniel, but fear held her back. What if the shadows were still connected to them? What if talking about it made things worse? One quiet evening, Laura stood on her apartment balcony, gazing at the stars. The night sky was vast and beautiful, filled with countless worlds waiting to be explored. Yet, for the first time in her life, she felt no desire to reach for them. Instead, she felt a deep sadness, a mourning for the innocence she'd lost. The boundary was still there, invisible but ever-present. Humanity continued to expand outward, blissfully unaware of the forces guarding the edge of their known universe. And though Laura knew she would never cross that line again, she couldn't help but wonder, what lay beyond? Was it salvation or destruction? As she turned away from the window, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass. For a moment, she thought she saw something behind her, a flicker of movement in the shadows. Her heart skipped a beat, but when she spun around, there was nothing there. She shook her head, forcing herself to breathe. It was just her imagination. Or so she told herself. Somewhere far beyond the boundary, the shadows waited patiently, silent guardians of secrets humanity was never meant to uncover. And though Laura, Daniel, and Samuel had escaped with their lives, they carried pieces of those shadows with them, reminders of the price of curiosity and the fragility of ignorance. In the end, the galaxy remained vast and unknowable, its mysteries protected by forces beyond comprehension. And perhaps, Laura thought as she closed her eyes, that was for the best.